of you. Nevertheless, I'll get started. My name is Rupert Lescott. I am Director of Knowledge Management for the consulting line of service at PwC Middle East. I'll give you a bit about my background and then I'll get into this. My first job after university many years ago was to join the British Army as an officer in the infantry. I served for about 10 years. Went to all the places that Tony Blair sent us back in those days and had a thoroughly good time. I really enjoyed it. I left in 2005, went into banking for a few years and then rejoined the army as a reservist to go to Afghanistan in 2008, at the end of which I got a job at the British Army's Lessons Exploitation Centre, at what's called the Land Warfare Centre in Warminster. And that is where I learnt about lessons, the so-called lessons learned process, and started to take an interest in this strange thing called knowledge management. From there, I was recruited into a boutique consulting firm called NOCO, and I worked with them and for them for about 7 years. And they brought me to Dubai. I'm currently in London at the moment, but I work and live in Dubai. I worked as a specialist in KM for the Electricity and Water Authority for a couple of years, and then joined PwC last year, just 1 week before we all went into lockdown due to COVID-19. So that's my background. When working at NOCO as a consultant, I was privileged to work across many different sectors with many high caliber clients. I worked in oil and gas, pharmaceuticals, media, manufacturing, defense, aerospace, and so on. And as a consultant, an internal consultant now for PwC, again, I am exposed to all sorts of client projects in different sectors. And this talk now is drawing upon my experience of working in knowledge management across many different sectors. And whilst all sectors have their own different flavors and priorities with regards to knowledge management, there are some common features which I think it's worth exploring. And what I'm going to talk about now is, why should we do this? Why should we seek to manage knowledge anyway? What's in it for us? What are the benefits? Okay. So the first thing is that we don't need to manage everything. No knowledge management initiative should seek to manage all knowledge. The key thing is to identify what's most important. And the way we do that is think about, what is it we do as an organization? What brings in the money? How do we get paid? What are the activities that keep us going and make us more profitable and add value? Whatever those activities are, we should be seeking to manage the knowledge needed to perform those activities. And as we do that, we also need to think about, what is it we as an organization are seeking to do? What is our strategy? What is our corporate strategy? What are our strategic objectives? And you can see some examples here on the slide. We may wish to increase our market share. We may wish to increase our size by merging or with or acquiring another firm. We may seek to improve the way that we work so that we become more efficient. We produce the same amount of work for less effort, less cost, less time, and so on. Or it might be that we wish to launch new products and services for our customers. Is that how we're going to achieve whatever our objectives are? And finally, we may wish to protect or defend capabilities. We may work in a field where there aren't many people or organizations out there that do this, whatever it is, and resources are scarce. And in particular, the people that know how to do these things are scarce. Therefore, the knowledge is of high value, and we don't want to lose it. We don't want the knowledge to escape, to leave the organization when those people leave, or heaven forbid, fall under a bus. That is another very important consideration when we consider the knowledge that we seek to manage. Are we looking to leverage it and use it to grow and improve, or are we actually more conservatively just seeking to protect it and hold on to it, to retain it, what is known as knowledge retention? Okay. So these are some of the reasons why an organization will seek to manage its knowledge. Now, knowledge management offers many opportunities to organizations, and I use the word organization rather than company because both public and private sector organizations seek to manage their knowledge. Some of them do it very well. So the opportunities that KM offers, as you can see here, and these are just examples, it can help us to improve the way that we work. If we learn how to do something better, how to sell more effectively, how to build or create or service or repair, whatever it is that we're working with, if we learn how to do that better and share that knowledge across the organization, then performance on the whole will improve. We may wish to innovate, we may wish to create something new, either out of the blue or more likely improve and update an existing capability. And clearly, knowledge and the application of knowledge can help us accelerate our innovation by actively, or rather proactively, learning. We can create new things more quickly. Also, KM can help us in what's called collaboration, and collaboration means people that wouldn't normally be working together. So KM can help us to spot and or identify and connect with people that might be useful to us. And the larger the organization, the greater the benefit of this as an opportunity. Clearly, if we're all co-located in one site, one office, we all know each other, and there's no more than 20 or 30 of us in the organization, we can leverage our relationships quite easily. However, as soon as we move into different sites and the scale of the organization increases, we no longer have those so-called water cooler moments where we bump into people and find that they can be helpful. And so we need to think about systems and approaches that will help us to identify those useful contacts. And KM can help us in this. And then there's best practice development. And this is not an exhaustive list, but these are just 4 examples of the opportunities that KM can help us. And best practice, quite simply, is having identified a better way of working, you make that the new normal. You codify and formalize that approach, and it becomes the benchmark against which behavior and performance is judged. So once someone has created something new, or a new method, a new approach, a new tool, a new sales technique, whatever it is, and it's been seen to have a positive impact, that new approach, that new practice, when codified, can become the new normal, and others can leverage it too. Of course, it needs to be directed and encouraged, and its uptake and engagement need to be measured and incentivized. We can talk about those in a bit. But that is another opportunity that KM offers to us, identifying what works and making that the standard. And again, for an organization that has a dispersed workforce, where we have multiple sites and people working to different managers and leaders, that will enable variation, and that isn't a bad thing. However, once we've worked out who is doing it better, we can identify the relevant knowledge and share it across the workforce and require people to adopt it. So the working practices that we use in the workplace, those change over time through the deliberate application of that new knowledge. Okay. Now, that's the positive side. Obviously, there are downsides and risks that we might incur if we don't manage our knowledge. And again, these are just some examples. Well, the first one, of course, is the opposite of performance improvement. It is inefficiency. It is performing work in a way that is not making best use of our resources or our time. It is taking longer to perform an activity than we might need to. It is using more resources, more money. It might be causing greater stress to the people doing that job. So inefficiency can creep in, and if we don't manage our knowledge, then what spreads is not best practice, but it is bad practice, and things may deteriorate if you don't have that deliberate, proactive focus on managing the knowledge needed to perform those activities. Another area is safety. Now, safety is quite a useful analogy, and it's a useful discipline or function that I often use to explain knowledge management to people. And there are certain sectors that do knowledge management better than others. And one of the reasons of that is this safety incentive or mandate, if you like. One of those sectors is oil and gas. Another one is the military. Now, oil and gas requires the extraction of a valuable resource from the earth in environments which are austere, to say the least. You're either in a desert somewhere or you're on an oil rig over the North Sea. Not much fun, and it's very hard going and dangerous work. On an oil rig, everything around you is metal and sharp, and the possibility of something going wrong is high. And more to the point, if something does go wrong, you know about it pretty darn quick. Okay, so the risk of not doing your job properly and not learning from mistakes is enormous, because people get injured or worse, die, as we know. And of course, enormous environmental damage is caused if a leak occurs. And a lot of money is lost by the firm if that said leak occurs. So there's an obvious incentive in oil and gas to learn quickly and effectively from what they're doing. And that is why back in the 90s, when knowledge management started, the pioneers in the field were the big oil companies. And most oil companies do have very effective systems of managing their knowledge because they have an obvious incentive to do so. Similarly, without laboring the point, in the military, if you do your job well, everyone comes home safe and well. If you don't, people may die or get injured. And there is an obvious incentive to learn effectively and quickly in so doing that. So the military, which some would argue is where knowledge management started, is another place where safety is a priority and is one of the reasons why they seek to manage their knowledge as they do. Quality, as I've mentioned, if we don't manage knowledge effectively, then what we are doing will not be as good as it could have been. The products we create, the services we offer may not be to customers and client satisfaction, and we'll lose business as a result. Knowledge loss is one of the risks I alluded to earlier, and that is where if we haven't captured and formalized the knowledge required to do certain things, then when people that know how to do those things leave, the knowledge goes with them. If it's all in Bob or Fatma's head how to do something, when he or she leave, either deliberately through choice or because they fall under a bus or for other reasons, if they leave, then knowing how to do it goes with them, and we have to start from scratch. We have to learn how to do it. Now, if it's a relatively straightforward administrative task, that may not be a problem, but if it's a very complex, sophisticated activity and all of the knowledge is in their heads, then the damage to us as an organization can. I remember doing an assessment for a technology company in Warrington many years ago, and they sell billing software to phone companies. So when we make calls and send text messages and use data, the software that calculates how much that costs and what to charge us was the product that this firm sold. And it had some very big, well-known clients like Telefonica, Vodafone, O2, and so on. When I did my assessment, I was asking people what knowledge was important and why they wanted to manage their knowledge and what capabilities they had to help them do it. Time and again, they referred to this one chap, let's call him John, And they said, well, we need to be doing this because if John fell under a bus tomorrow, we would all be screwed. We would not be able to continue to operate. And I spoke to John, and he led the architecture team. That is basically, he led the team that designed and sustained and developed the software that they were selling as a product. And he was one of the biggest fans of the idea of knowledge management. He wasn't concerned about being let go if all of his knowledge was codified. It would free him up to do some blue sky thinking like he used to do, and to further develop the product they were selling. So if John had left that firm and or some of his colleagues, then they would not be able to continue to grow and develop as they were. So knowledge loss is a very important risk that needs to be considered when thinking about whether to and what sort of knowledge we're going to manage. Moving on quickly, a brief look at culture, because culture is both an input and an output to many things, and certainly with knowledge management. And there's 4 areas I want to quickly touch on here. For us to be able to share knowledge effectively, and for it to be what we do as an organization, requires leadership. It requires support from senior leadership, not just in signing off on policy, but actual physical leadership by example, where people demonstrate what is required with regards to knowledge, and how we are going to proactively and deliberately learn. When I was in the lessons team, I remember a briefing given by a colonel who'd come back from Afghanistan, and he was giving a briefing about 1 week after he'd returned, and it was quite common in these events for them all to be very gung-ho and aggressive and pleased with themselves and what they'd done, because they'd been pumped up for 6 months in a very hostile environment. And I remember his talk, he talked about an operation that he'd led 6 weeks into his tour in Helmand, in a place called Nadali. And there were about 300 soldiers involved, a mix of British and Afghan soldiers. They put in a cordon around the town, and some mobile patrols and a number of checkpoints to enable the marketplace, the bazaar in the center of the town, to open up again and to operate, and people to do business. And he thought about the problem, drawing on his experience of Northern Ireland, put the plan in place, and for a couple of days all was well. Then he extracted all the mobile patrols in the outer cordon and left a couple of checkpoints, and then was phoned by one of his company commanders telling him, "Boss, we've got a problem." And what had happened was that the Taliban had put a motorbike through the center of the town, one guy on the back with a mobile phone holding an AK-47 rifle and just reporting what he could see. And of course, all the market traders there saw this, and they closed up shop and didn't want to come out again. And he said it was the most important thing that happened on the tour, because he made him realize he didn't really understand where he was operating. He conceded that he'd been arrogant and ignorant, and he tore up the operating order that he drafted for the whole tour. And he called in his command group along with Afghan senior officers, and they rewrote it. He said it was the most useful thing that could have happened, because it enabled us to rethink our approach to this. And no incident like that occurred ever again, because we learned that we needed to be consulting our Afghan colleagues and asking them, this is our approach, how would we implement that here? How does it work in Helmand? How does it work in Afghanistan? Now, the story itself isn't important, but the fact that he was telling it is. Now, he was a lieutenant colonel when he told the story. He's now a major general, and the army obviously agrees that having someone of that caliber talking honestly about their mistakes is a valuable thing. The hair stuck up on the back of my neck as he told the story, because you never hear senior important people, alpha male types, who willingly talk about things that went wrong because of their own decisions. So that kind of leadership is the sort that's needed for organizations to embrace knowledge management, because people need to demonstrate that it's okay to talk about things when they go wrong. That requires honesty, as we can see. And being honest about things that go wrong can be difficult. We, as humans, none of us likes to be embarrassed. None of us likes to be unpopular. We like being popular, and we don't like embarrassing other people unless we're sort of a sociopath. And for those four common features of us as human beings make it very difficult for us to share experiences unless they're positive ones. And we can learn from positive and negative alike, but it's the honesty in discussion that gives the real value, and that's why we need what's called a just culture. A just culture is where we create an environment where it's okay to talk about things that go wrong. We get rewarded for talking about things that went wrong rather than punished for the thing that went wrong. You see what I mean? That's an important element here. And finally, the incentives. I'm a believer that KPIs and metrics have their place. Of course they do, but it's better to have none than to have bad ones. Too often, poorly designed KPIs result in bad behavior because people work to the KPI and they don't do the right thing because it's the right thing. So I think KPIs have their place, but they need to be introduced carefully and slowly. Better to let things run their course and observe what is normal activity before you start measuring it and putting in targets that people need to achieve. So incentives and KPIs obviously have their place, but I think they need to be one of the elements of a KM framework that takes the longest to implement, and it's okay to be patient and take your time in that area in particular. Cool. Right, I'm conscious of the time. I've probably taken up the time I've got here. If there are any questions, I won't be able to hear you, but if you want them typed in the chat box, let me know. Otherwise, David, I'm handing over back to you.
Excellent. It's a shame, actually, Rupert. I'm assuming you still can't hear me unless you jump in. It's a shame that we couldn't go into questions. There are, yeah, some sage advice there again, actually, certainly around culture and certainly as we saw earlier from Hank, the challenges of the incentive of managing risk as well, which is a very obvious one there. And I think certainly in organizations, if that was a highlighted reason, then that sort of makes more sense, I think, from a buy-in perspective. So we're going to move on, Rupert. Thank you very much indeed. And I know you can't hear me. It's been a pleasure. And hopefully, next time we get the opportunity, we can ask some questions and maybe have a chat as well. Because and obviously Rupert won't hear this, but I was very lucky enough to spend some time in DEWA, which is the electricity and water